Before I do, I need to say something in honor of my father. The night before I left, I came here yesterday, and the night before, my father passed away, and so I come with a little heavy heart. At the same time, it wasn't totally unexpected. I mean, he's been growing more feeble over time. He lived with us. He and my mother lived with us for for about a year and a half or so, and then my mother passed away in August, and my father passed away. So I fly back home this afternoon or right after this morning's meeting, and we will bury him tomorrow morning. But my father was an amazing man. I just need to share this because it helps you understand my composition, because I have a DNA from this incredible man that was my father. He's 85 years old when he passed away. My father was born in what they call the Panhandle of Texas. It's North Texas, and in Hereford, Texas. And there's a lot of wind up there, and it's high plains, and so it gets very cold in the winter. He was born as the son of a sharecropper. My grandfather Jackson was a sharecropper. He farmed land for other people, and he tended that land, but they were very, very poor. So my father was raised in a little two-room house that was actually a converted chicken coop. And they would wallpaper the walls with cardboard in order to keep the winter wind from coming through the flat boards that were on the siding of the chicken coop. My father was a very brilliant man, had a very high IQ. He skipped 2 grades in school, entered into college very early. Where he met my mother, he achieved 2 master's degrees and was 1 dissertation short of 2 doctorate degrees and a specialist degree. But he wanted to be a missionary. He and my mom wanted to be missionaries, but when they realized, they went through all the training and ready to go. We were ready to go to Nigeria, and the denomination that we were a part of instituted a law, or not a law, but a policy. And the policy said that missionaries that have children have to leave their children in children's homes and go to the mission field. And so my mother and father decided not to be missionaries to Nigeria, but Nigeria continued to whisper in their ears, and they constantly had a passion for missions from that. My father became a teacher. He graduated, was going to be a pastor, but in the middle of his sermons, he would have blank spots, and so he would just stop, and he could not remember what to say. I suspect it was the Holy Spirit moving on him, and he didn't understand it, even then. Because of his brilliance, he had his sermons memorized. But he became a teacher, and in that he began to counsel people, and he began to touch people. And we were in church 3 or 4 times a week. And so us kids would be outside playing, shooting baskets or something on the church parking lot, and Dad would be inside counseling people. And I told people for years, my dad makes people cry. I didn't understand why everybody who left had tears in their eyes, their faces were red, and had Kleenex in their hands. And so I would ask my dad, why does that happen? And he said, well, son, when the Lord touches people, sometimes that just happens. And deep inside my little boy's heart, I said, well, God may have touched him, but he used my dad to do it. My dad grew to be he was a very man that deeply loved and loved people coming to their house. Even as he got older and he had macular degeneration in his eyes and he couldn't see, his knees began to give out. He began to lose his balance, and he would periodically, more than once, forget that he left something on the stove cooking. But he loved people, and people loved him, from the man who mowed his lawn, who was ready to commit suicide until he met my dad, to the nurse that took care of him, to the hospice people who helped him in his last couple of months, to the nurses who came by to check on his blood pressure. Every one of them loved my dad. He led people to the Lord just in the last few, his whole life he led people to the Lord. And even the last few months when he couldn't walk, he couldn't see, he had trouble remembering the Bible verses and the Greek and Hebrew that he had so carefully memorized over the years. He still led people to the Lord from his hospital bed. People got saved. People got saved. They would come to the house, and they wanted, 2 weeks before he passed away, a couple that was Meals on Wheels. And he wanted Meals on Wheels because it gave him more opportunity to talk to people about Jesus. The Meals on Wheels people was a backslidden Lutheran pastor who rededicated his life to the Lord, he and his wife, and wanted to start a Bible study with my dad 2 weeks before my dad passed away. I look at my dad and I realize what a great man he was. And anything that God has called me to be is because he and my mother planted something in me. Now, why do I say that? I think it's very important that we honor our mother and father. It doesn't mean you agree with them, and it doesn't mean they're perfect. But there is an honor. And what God has put into me, I would not be there without my dad. The discipline he gave me, I was a wild child. I was wild. I got spankings 11 times in one day for just one thing, going across the street. I would not stop running across the street to play with my friend. 11 times I got spanking that day. 11 for one thing. And it's not because he spanked me 11 times because I did it once. It's because I did it 11 times. Always was a rebellious child, always was a strong-willed child, always was running against the grain of the family. My brothers and sisters were all compliant. I, as the oldest, was never compliant. But God worked through that, and God used my father to hone me and to prepare me. I would not be able to do what I do today, nor say what I say today, had it not been for the discipline of my father. So I honor him before you, and we will bury him tomorrow morning. And while I will miss him, heaven is better off. Thank you. I met Julie Myers in 1985. She was just barely out of diapers. And so we've known each other a long time. We just recently reconnected again over a number of years. But when I came to Kansas City to be with Mike Bickle for 5 or so years, a little more, I had something happen to me, and I didn't exactly know what to do with this something. I was in a corporate business world, and I had my life all mapped out. I was going to have a big house, and I would drive my wife through rich neighborhoods, like $1 million homes, and say, honey, pick out the house you want. In 10 years, it's yours. I had my life mapped out. Knew what I was going to be, knew what I was going to do, but I had no clue what God wanted me to do. I didn't even consider him except in believing that whatever I wanted, he wanted. Now, probably none of you are like that. You never just kind of assume, well, if I want it, God wants it. He said he's going to give me the desires of my heart, and this is my desire. So, well, that was me. But I had an encounter, and in this encounter, I was laying in bed one morning. I was in the top 100 of a Fortune 500 company. As a 30-year-old, I had a key to the executive club on the top floor of the building. I was the youngest person to ever have a key to that club. I would go up there, and all these really old guys, 50, 60-year-olds. I call those children now. But all those really old guys were up there, and they would look at me like, what's this pup doing up here? And I would just show them my key. Well, I was laying in bed one morning. We had a side business, a daycare center. We had 100 children that would come in and out of our daycare center every day. I would used to go to the daycare center with my wife, and we would open up. I would hug the kids, and I would go to work, and she would be left there with all the children and the teachers. This day, I couldn't talk. I woke up. I couldn't eat. I couldn't get out a whisper. Nothing would come out. Just like, realizing that I would have to be on the phone all day at work and then not wanting to pass anything on to the children, I stayed in bed that morning. My wife left to go to the daycare center. It was November the 11th, 1980, and it was dark. Somewhere in the dark after my wife left, I'm laying in bed, and I realize there's a light in the room, and I think I must have left the light on. I start to get up to turn the light off, and I realize that that light is not coming from the light bulb in the ceiling. Very soon, in just a few minutes, that light begins to expand. It takes up the entire room. Everything disappears in the room. The chest of drawers disappear. The mirror disappears. The lamps disappear. Everything disappears. I'm left in the presence of a holy God. I roll out of bed onto the floor because the bed is too high in the presence of this holiness. At that particular time, he began to review my life with me. He plays my life back with me from the time that my mother was carrying me and the miracle that it was that I was even born, because she carried me for 11 months to the day, documented. And that 11-month pregnancy was to be a sign that the angel announced to her before she even conceived me that I would have an 11th hour ministry, and I would tell things that are not as though they were, and they would come to pass, and that even her pregnancy would be a sign of my 11th hour ministry. She could have chose a lot of different ways to have it a sign, but that was a particular sign God gave. And he showed me that right after I was born, 6 weeks after I was born, I died because I ended up having a rupture. I broke 3 of her ribs in the birth, and my intestines ruptured. And so for 6 weeks, part of everything that I ate entered into my abdominal cavity, and gangrene set in. They thought I was a colicky baby, but I wasn't a colicky baby. They began to notice that gangrene was there because they saw it through the skin. They took me to the doctor. The doctor opens me up. He realizes that I'm in trouble. Looks at me. They immediately put me into an operating room. They operate up on me. I die on the operating table. And my mother cries out to God, God, you promised my son would have an 11th hour ministry. He would preach the gospel, and he has not done that. You are not a liar. You are God. You must bring him back. And God brought me back. He showed me, prior to that birth, he showed me my mother drinking bottles of castor oil, which I never knew until I asked her if that was true, trying to induce the uterus into contractions. I saw her sitting at the top of a stairway, bouncing down on her rear end, down the stairs, trying to induce this baby to come. None of that worked. She told me it was a sign of my stubbornness from the very beginning. As I began to continue to grow, the Lord began to move upon me, and I began to know things before they happened. When I was 4 years old, I told Mom and Dad things that would happen, and they took place. As I was 6 and 7 years old, I would tell them who was going to come to the door that day, somebody who had quit the business, the delivery man that had left to go to another company. All those things came true. I did not know that I had a gift. I just thought everybody could do this. When I'm 14, 12, 10, children come into our house. I visit my grandparents, and before the time that we were over, it seemed like every time it ended up, John Paul is in the yard, and the kids are gathered around him, and we're all playing something called Let's Let John Paul Tell Us About Ourselves. And I thought, okay, everybody can do this. They don't want to do it. I guess I'll do it, so here we go. I'll do it. So he begins to review these things with me. Reviews how when I was 12 years old, I came home with mumps and encephalitis, and how my body temperature went up to 104 degrees for 3 weeks, and I was quarantined. How then after 3 weeks, it went up even worse, and I began to hallucinate. And the doctor came and checked me out, and I had encephalitis and the mumps simultaneously. And what ends up happening is your temperature escalates, and the lining of your brain swells, and you end up going to sleep and dying. For 3 days, they packed me in a tube of ice because my temperature reached clear to the end of the thermometer, which is over 107 degrees. The doctor on the medical report put down 110 degrees plus, and that all of us 40 years of being a doctor had never seen anything like this. He began to prepare my mother and father for me to die. He said it would be better if I died because I'll never know them again. Your son is brain dead. His heart is still beating, he's still breathing, but he's brain dead. And they said he'll never know you again. He'll never be able to speak again. He's going to have heart trouble. He's going to have kidney trouble. He's going to have liver trouble, and he will die at an early age. And he'll have diapers, and you're going to have to change him. And this is your son, and it's really better if he dies. On the third day that happened, I died. My mother, my father, my pastor, my doctor was in the room. My parents were crying. My pastor was trying to comfort them. I had died. I left my body. I was going up into the light. I looked behind me, and the light was blinding. I looked back down at my body in the bed. It was like a picture window, and the further I got away, the smaller the window got. As I'm looking at myself, I hear my mother crying out, and she's saying the same thing again. She's saying, God, you said my son. You are not a liar. You must honor your word. You must bring him back. And I was there for about 45 minutes. I came back down. By the time I got to the roof, I entered myself again, and I realized I was freezing because of this ice that I was packed in. And so I said, hey, I'm cold. Get me out of here. The doctor was so shocked. He's like stuttering. And he begins to ask me, what's 1 plus 1? 2 plus 2, 5 plus 7, 20 minus 13. What's your phone number? What's your name? It's like trying to find out if I had any intelligence left. What ended up happening, they gave me an intelligence test later. My IQ went up by 20 points. Yeah. And I needed that. The Lord begins to review all these things with me. He begins to review how, and he says, here's some things you don't know. And I asked my mother about the pre-delivery things, and she said, how did you know? I've never told you that. I said, I saw you doing it. She begins to, the Lord begins to review to me all the times he saved my life. He said, this is nothing. He said, there's so many times I saved your life. And he said, and I save all of my children's life like this every day, and they don't know it. He said, watch this. And he showed me multiple times when the car wouldn't start, the battery was dead, and I was hitting the steering wheel going, what in the world? I'm like angry, this businessman who's got to go conquer the world. And had the car started, I would have been in an accident and killed in the accident. He showed me a time where I ran out of gas. I'm thinking I couldn't have run out of gas. I had a half a tank like 2 miles ago. And now that it's on empty. And had I not run out of gas, I'd been in an accident and I would have been killed. He showed me where I actually was able to drive further on gasoline than I had in the car, because had I stopped, I would have been robbed on the highway and beaten and killed. He says, I do this for my children all the time, and they don't know it. And he was letting me know, you're not special. It was like, as my father had the chicken coop, I had this. My father never forgot the chicken coop he came from. I never forgot this moment where God says, you're not special. It's just a function in the kingdom, son. It's no more valuable than parking lot detail. It's no more valuable than the children's ministry. It's no more valuable than worship. It's something that allows the kingdom to function. So you're not special. And the Lord began to move on me. And so this morning, as he's reviewing all of that with me, as I'm laying on the floor, wailing and crying and sobbing, realizing how unholy I was and how holy he was, he begins to say, now this is what I'm going to do with you in the future. And he begins to show me and tell me, here's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to cause you to speak words that are going to be very, very difficult. I'm going to cause you to release things in a time, and people aren't going to want to hear what you have to say. But when you have the opportunity to say it, you must step forward and you must speak the things that I've called you to say. So I ended up leaving the ministry, and long story, but I ended up leaving the corporate world and going into ministry. And I have quit 1,000 times and been thankful 1,000,000 times. I'm so glad that God called me to do what he's called me to do, but there is pain. Solomon said, with much knowledge comes much sorrow. When I came to Kansas City in 1985 and started working with Mike Bickle at that particular time, I was really green, really, really green. I barely knew dog from Sikkim. I fell off the turnip truck just the night before. You know, those are Waxahachie sayings, if you didn't know what that means. Waxahachie sayings. That's where I was born. Remember last night I was born in Waxahachie, Texas? So I didn't know, I left the corporate world just a couple of years earlier. But God had moved up on me, and there was a connection there between Mike and myself, and something happened in very unusual ways. And I came into Kansas City with all these things about this is what's going to be happening in the United States of America. And what he had shown me some things. And then as time began to grow, God began to say, I need to broaden what I've called you to do. And I started into more personal prophetic ministry versus national prophetic ministry. And as I started this I started doing this personal prophetic ministry, then that ended up with John Wimber coming to Kansas City and asking Mike if he could take me to California and teach me theology and bibliology and historiology and so on. And so Mike agreed, and I went to California and stayed with John Wimber for a number of years. And then the Lord decided the next thing I needed to do was learn how to be more patient and more kind and more gentle. And then he sent me through tribulation called being a pastor. Because tribulation works patience. So I ended up becoming planting my first church in Moline, Illinois, and have planted 6 churches since then, pastored 2 other churches, and been on staff at 3 other churches with very large churches, with Larry Lee, with Mike Bickle, and with John Wimber. And now, in the latter years of my ministry, I think I'm going to live a lot more years, but at 60, 62 years of age, you're not particularly thinking, what world can I conquer now? You're looking at guys like Matt and saying, hey, go conquer that world. You're thinking about, how do I handle and how do I leave a legacy? Where are the young men and women that are going to be champions in the next move? And how are they going to, what are they going to be doing, and what are they going to be doing? And how can I help them get to where God's called them to be? But for some reason, all of a sudden, in 2007, the Lord said to me, I want you to start talking about national and international events again. And I thought, whoa, time out. I'm patient. I'm a pastor. And he says, no, you've never been a good pastor. You are more patient, but you still have a lot of work to do. He says, I want you to become what I birthed you to become. And he began to renew the things that he had talked to me about in the nation and begin to show me more things concerning this nation. And he said, this is the time for which you were born. You're about, this nation and the world is about to head into this era that I told your mother about. Your 11th hour ministry has begun. And so he began to tell me about things that were going to be happening very, very quickly. He said, you need to prepare yourself. You need to start talking about this. You need to start preparing the people. There's a storm coming. It's a terrible storm. And he called it a perfect storm. And he says, I'm going to use this term. He said, but you're going to hear it used a lot in the coming years. They're going to hear this term a lot. They're going to be, there's the perfect storm. It's a perfect storm of a blend of these economic conditions. It's a perfect storm of a blend of these climatological conditions. It's a perfect storm of these political conditions. You're going to hear this a lot, but I'm telling you, do it now. I argued for a year. And early in 2008, I said, okay, Lord, I will do this. And we put out this message called The Coming Perfect Storm. And here's what the Lord said. He said there are 5 elements that this storm is comprised of. Those 5 elements are religion, politics, economics, war, and geophysical events. He said, these are the things that the prophets of old spoke of. These are the things I want you to speak of. There are political changes coming. There are religious wars and shifts going to be happening. There are economic downturns that are going to be taking place. There are things that are going to be happening climatologically, and you need to be able to speak and tell people this is what's coming. He said, my church has forgotten that I still am a God of justice, and I still bring judgment to my people to redeem them. And if I do not allow judgment to come, or if I do not allow these crises to come, then my wrath will have to come. And I'm going to allow my judgments to come in order for redemption of my people, so they will cry out to me, and in the day that they cry out to me, I will be found again. And so I know that we are headed towards a great move of God. It's what will it take to get us there that I'm concerned about. I know that our best days lie ahead of us. It's what will it take to get us there. That's what I'm concerned about. You see, when God begins to, sin separates us from God. And from the very beginning, if this is us and this is God's hand, from the very beginning, as the more we sin, God's hand lifts. And the more God's hand lifts, the more room the enemy has to get in. And that's what's taking place. The enemy has a lot of room to get into our nation and this world right now. The spiritual water tables are at a low ebb. And from the spiritual water table, you have spiritual leaders, or you have political leaders that arise. And the political leaders arise only a certain amount. Let's just say 10% above the water table will be a spiritual leader. And if the water table is low, then it's 10% above the low. If the water table is high, it's 10% above the high. And right now we're at a low ebb. We're in a drought.